I'd like to introduce our moderator and host, Anna McKay, who will welcome our panelists and get us going.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm going to be hosting today. So for this discussion, we asked each of our 9 panelists to talk about a few things or just think about them for some little presentations they'll be giving, namely speaking to their own experiences in organizing, their thoughts about maintaining and furthering the goals and interests of this current movement, any tips, steps, or lessons that they've learned or been taught in their journey in organizing that have been helpful, relevant, or important, the various and important ways that people can be active and participate in this community work and in organizing, and how to maintain care for themselves and others in this process. Everyone will present their take on one or more of these thoughts or whatever else that they might want to talk about. So very quickly, I will introduce all of our panelists. We have Jody Likes, who is a hip hop scholar and the coordinator for the African Diaspora Program at the Center at UNR. We have Jackie Duran, who currently serves as the regional campus organizer with the National Youth Organizing Team at Planned Parenthood Action Fund. In Jackie's role, she supports organizers creating strategies for youth engagement through PP Gen Action chapters on the campuses in states west of the Mississippi River. We have Kristen Harrison, who works on an electoral campaign currently and considers herself to be someone who is always learning about the avenues in which we pursue liberation outside of the electoral system. Jamila Baruti, who is a queer first-generation Palestinian American who over the last year has worked in corporate social responsibility and social equity in the cannabis industry. Ryan Moore, who is the Sustainability and Outreach Manager of the Nevada Youth Climate Strike, which is a local youth-run organization that focuses on the Reno Tahoe community to foster a brighter future. Lydia Huerta, who holds a joint faculty position in the Department of Communication and the Gender, Race, and Identity program at UNR, where she specializes in 20th and 21st century cultural studies of the Americas with an emphasis on the relationship between social media and narratives about the US-Mexico border. Monique Normand, who was previously a community organizer with Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada and also worked at UNR. Monique is the co-founder of Women of Color and Coffee, which allows a space for women of color in the community. Monique is currently a social work intern and serves low income and communities of color in Reno, Nevada. Helen Fillmore, who I think is with us, currently sits on the Tribal Council for the Washoe tribe as an off-reservation representative and is just one of a handful of remaining speakers of the Washoe language. In 2017, Helen published an article titled "Using the Washoe Language to Inform Hydrologic and Environmental Models." Action works to organize communities of faith to fight for racial and economic justice in Northern Nevada. ARIA is passionate about ensuring that all low-income folks have access to opportunities to succeed and to live safe and healthy lives. So that is all of our presenters. As they speak, please check the chat for any resources that they may mention. Just click the chat button at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, you can open the chat, select questions, and send your questions to that person. We'll do our best to get to a couple questions after each panelist presents, and then at the end, we'll have a bigger Q&A with all the speakers. And if you have any technical problems with Zoom, you can direct those to any of the admins who are available in the chat. And so without further ado, we'll get started. Our first speaker is Jody Likes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jody, and I first got to say it's an honor to be here with you all today and in this group. And I'm looking around and I see some people that I know and have mad respect for. So by way of introduction, I work right now in the Center Every Student, Every Story at the university. I've been there for 10 years, which in itself is kind of interesting, a place to be. I coordinate the African Diaspora Program, which is retention for Black students. And I think before I even do more of an introduction, I think the revolution belongs to youth. And so I believe that youth have a certain place in this narrative. And while we put up memes that show that we're in a time similar to the 60s or other revolutionary times in this country's past, I think this is your moment. So whenever I give advice to youth, I hope that you will empower yourselves and trust yourselves, because you have ideas I don't have. we have everything in the history of change making as a canon, as a library, as a source to say, you know, this is how people did it before, but this is your moment, and that I wouldn't steal it for you for anything. In my moment, when I was a student, I started a hip hop group at BYU. I'm a BYU student. You can only imagine what that was like, being Black at BYU 20 years ago. I come from Sunnyside, Washington, in the Yakima Valley, which is a place of incredible organization, mostly out of necessity, for immigrant workers, mostly of Mexican heritage at the time I was there. But that was how I grew up, seeing things that I never thought I would ever imagine or didn't understand at the time that I was there until later. And then I'm from the Central Coast of California in Santa Maria. And they're just places where I think organizing happens naturally because you have to. Out of necessity, you've got to do things to bring yourself together. More recently, and probably, I was in Marin County working for the county, and that's when we did some real direct action, and we did marches. I've marched a lot, and I haven't marched for a good, say, 5, 6 years. Mostly because I felt I needed a change in the direction I took in my activism, and I started working more with parents in schools and teaching with MALDEF, Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, just information about how families could navigate schools, and especially Spanish-speaking families, parents who only spoke Spanish. That led me to some of the most, in this district, the most civil rights-like experiences that I've had. One of those was being on a bus with a group of families, and the bus driver was swerving hard, trying to jerk people around because she was mad that we were taking Latinx families to the school board, to talk to the school board. I had to ask her, like, are you upset? Please stop. And these moments that when you're doing things, I really do think, you know, sometimes you don't really plan for them to be radical per se. And people respond in certain ways that it turns into a radical situation. You have to make decisions. On campus, which is kind of where I've spent most of my time, it's just starting discussions recently. I wrote a dissertation on interviewing Black faculty who teach hip hop, and I think that maybe right now my moment is in anti-Blackness. I will rarely quote Jay-Z, but Jay has a line. He says, if you want my old shit, buy my old album. And I think my activism has changed so much over time. And I think it's in response to the moment I'm in. But recently, it's starting discussions about difference, be it racial, sexuality, gender, a lot of different intersections, and having those conversations that we dialogue where we don't get the freedom to dialogue often. And I really, in all honesty, the reason I moved into education was, one, I could get paid for it. So I made my career my activism, and that could be tricky sometimes too. I probably put my career on hold a lot of times by saying certain things or having certain stances. But to be honest, in full honesty, that last question, I'm going to jump to it first, is you got to take care of yourself. Because I burn out being in the streets screaming, and the pain and the suffering, seeing people, is not all my pain, but seeing people and seeing a broken immigration system, it really made me, I got burnt out after a couple of years of intense trying to organize. But if we don't take care of ourselves when we're doing this, it's a wrap, because you can't take care of people when you're hurt. And I guess you can find ways to push through, but the more you stay in this, if we don't take care of each other, if we fight with each other, I mean, that's one of the things that was really hard, that we had a lot of people interested in making change, but we decided to fight each other, and then we broke each other down. And it happens. I know it happens. But taking care of ourselves, self-care, I may do this, I don't know. It's off a professional vein, but when I was writing my dissertation, Manny Petty's saved my life. And I promise you, like, whatever it is for you, you got to find what it is that makes you taken care of, that you take care of yourself. And I think I have more to say, but I really did want to default to some of y'all questions and there's some really great people in this room, and people who've been in my classrooms and survived semesters of me asking them what it means to be white, and asking their classmates what it means to be white. And I think when you start a discussion on whiteness, that deserves a round of applause for anyone in this room who's done that with me, and always comes back to participate and as panelists and some dope activists in here. So was that 5 minutes? Where am I at? I should pause.
I think you're at around 5 minutes. Someone submitted a question for you. It was how can we make UNR a better, safer place for Black students, Native students, Latinx students, and other students of color?
Shit. Yeah, that's a hard question. Whoever asked it, and I see a lot of campus people, and you know what? It's there are just certain things that are not going to change, and I'm with a group of people that fight those things for those things that aren't going to change. I also believe in a weird sense, like there are certain things that we can do at the university that we can't do in other places. And so I have mad love for Nevada. Like I come from California. I came from Marin. Civic engaged, like you walk in the streets, people are talking to each other. At least in my experience, it might be different. Downtown Santa Fe, where I lived, people were organizing, we marched, we came together. And here it's a little bit different, the way that people interact and engage. But I really do think that we have things here and we can do things here. But if you're talking specifically for Black students and Native students, I mean, anti-Blackness is huge. And I guess, I mean, this is recorded, but in my history of working at the university, there's some things that happen that are so damn racist. I don't usually say them. I promise you I don't say them, because it's really frustrating to try to reserve a room and get racism from people that just are going to reserve the room for you. You know, like simple things you're trying to do get shut down when you're dealing with Black community. And it's that is one that doesn't seem to go away, that has had some wins, and so wins and losses, right? It's all about the W's and L's. And there are some, you just have to recognize the wins when they're there, and there's losses too. And there's kind of a lot of losses. I love to see our students be active. We had, what's that dude's name? Charlie Kirk. And all like that happened if you're a student right now, you had an institution support a neo-Nazi fascist speaker, right? White supremacist, and ask you to support them as well in the name of free speech. I don't see that's definitely got to be a low light. But you organized. And I know there are students on campus organizing. And one day I was standing in the KC. A bunch of people dropped down flyers from every floor of the KC. And I didn't know that was going to happen. And all of a sudden, there's an action on campus that says UNR supports racists. That's a slogan that tends to piss off the administration. I meet with the administration. I'm the administration. There are ways that you are making changes that I would not have guessed to do. Wolfpack Radio, I love the place. Ways that you can, as students with funds in ASUN, raise your voice and be active. So I know that's a long answer. Last point on that one, I believe there's a shortage of ethnic studies and classrooms that you can go into and have the discussion about your identities, and then how to organize around protecting your identities and protecting yourself. So I would say in the classroom, it needs to happen more.
Thank you so much, Jody. Yeah, I'm just kind of starting my own time at UNR, and I think that there's so much work to do there. So thank you so much for your thoughts. Just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, you can send them to the questions co-host in the chat, and then we'll get to some questions after each speaker. And then again at the end, so if you have more questions for Jody, you are welcome to drop them in there. And we're gonna go ahead and move on to Jackie.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anna. It's always so hard to go after Jody because he has so much wisdom and was one of the professors who ignited a flame that I feel was already inside me. So thanks, Jody, and other folks who are on this panel. I admire you all so much. So it's great to be here with y'all. My name is Jackie Doron. I use she, her, and ella pronouns. I currently am on the National Youth Organizing team at Planned Parenthood Action Fund, and I support youth engagement across the country, but focused on states on the West Coast. So I do support young people who are often erased from our movements, but are the pillars and the foundations of the folks who are leading our movements. We're often seen as folks who are not interested or, any number of things, but we've seen in history and now that that is not the truth, and young people are leading, especially now. Young folks of color are doing it in a way that has brought in so many people, have done cross-issue movement, right? So I'm glad that I get to support young folks in that. I started my work at UNR, actually. So I started organizing Latinx students with the Latinx Student Advisory Board, which may or may not exist again on campus, but if it does, check them out, as well as our PP Gen Action chapter, also at UNR, which I think is still alive and thriving. And I started because I saw just the discrepancies of access to sexual and reproductive health in Nevada as a whole. I'm a Sparks local. I currently don't live in Sparks, but I am here visiting my mom. And I saw that Nevada had no access to any resources for anyone, especially young people. So when I got to UNR, I knew that one of the things that I could do was do consent workshops and try to advocate for sex ed in local school boards as well as across the state during the legislative session. And I continued that work even now to the work that I do currently. And then with LSAB, so the Latinx Student Advisory Board, I really got my start when or I would say my highlight of my time there was after the 2016 election, where Orange Face was elected. We saw a spike in campuses calling for sanctuary campus, and so that meant that their universities would not collaborate with ICE or the police in turning over basically undocumented students. And so I was one of the folks, along with 3 other women of color and Dr. Emma Sepulveda, who's no longer at the university because she was outed as in like pushed out of the university because UNR does not support women of color as professors. But we were able to, our fight was really short but successful. We were able to establish a student services coordinator at the university, so a funded position where their job is to support really marginalized students and students who are historically exploited. And I was able to be part of the creation of that. So, so with that though, now I've transitioned to Planned Parenthood, but before that I was at Forward Together in Oregon, and they're a reproductive justice organization, and I worked to create field strategies to defeat a anti-immigrant ballot measure in the state, as well as an anti-abortion ballot measure in the state. So my work is both issue-based, electoral, and more. So there are a few questions that folks, Holland sent us that I really want to touch on. And one of them actually Jody already brought up about care. And so he talked about self-care, but I really want to also talk about community care and what that looks like for folks. So I have a few notes, which is why I'm looking down. But often in community care, we're looking at ways that expand beyond the self, that are really centered against anti-capitalism and anti-colonialism. I think obviously there are ways for folks to be able to take care of themselves that exist outside of that. And often that looks like reaching into your folks, reaching into your community, and ensuring that community folks are as safe as possible. We've seen in COVID, this is actually a perfect example, an opportunity where mutual aid funds have actually popped up across the country, right? There's one in, I want to say there's one in Reno. I know there's a bail fund in Reno. So that's community bringing in the resources collectively together and ensuring that folks are safe. So there are alternatives to the ways in which capitalism has socialized us to believe we need to do this one way, we need to do this the other. And we're seeing it now as an opportunity that we can throw out those kind of institutions and really take care of community in a way that doesn't uphold the institutions that are racist, that are white supremacist, right, that are capitalistic, that are all of the things ableist, and the list goes on, and that really challenge systems of power. And so as I think about what community care looks like, mutual aid funds are one. As we think about in this moment, what defunding the police is, what abolishing the police is, and what alternatives to the police look like. It looks like community care. It doesn't look like community policing, right? It's not one person saying you can't do this and that, but it is the community being able to fill the resources that exist, that are non-existent for so many of us, especially folks who have lack of access to capital, which are often queer, trans, and communities of color. And what that looks like at the intersections of power. And so as we're thinking about what are the ways in which we can engage in this moment, engage in organizing, it really is to look to community, and it really is to start from the center out, and center those who are most impacted in this care and in the folks that need care, and then do that work outwardly, right? So it's both an internal, as you do self-care, I like to think that self-care is also holding yourself accountable, and community care is holding the people that you love accountable. So one of the things that I see often is, unfriend me if you don't think X, Y, and Z, especially from white people who quote unquote are trying to do well-meaning things, but that's not enough actually. You putting yourself on the line is actually calling out your racist loved ones, and you can do it in the way that's safe. Obviously, it depends on your situation, and this isn't necessarily a one size fits all, but a way that everyone can get engaged is calling your folks in or out. I actually don't care. I appreciate being called out, but take that as you want. But as I think about, loving someone is wanting them to do better and be better so that we can hold institutions and systems to do better and be better. And so we can't just one-off people. We can't just ignore people and throw them away. That's not transformative. That's not justice. That's not bringing us to liberation, because liberation is centering the people to build a world in which all of us are able to thrive and have the rights, recognition, and resources that we need. And that doesn't mean throwing people away. And that can be applied to any number of things, from reproductive health and access to police, to how higher education is often an ivory tower, inaccessible to so many of us, to how we look at elections, right? So other questions, but I'm gonna pause there because I can always talk forever and ever, but I also want to hear other people. I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah, so we got a question for you. Are there things that you would think would surprise most people about reproductive rights or healthcare in Reno specifically? And just quickly, are there any things that we can do to help or make sure our rights aren't rolled back even more?
Great. Yeah, so Nevada is pretty fortunate in that in the 90s we passed the right to choice bill, which if Roe v. Wade, that codified in the Supreme Court legalized abortion access for all across 50 states. If that were to be overturned, Nevada as a whole is actually one of the most accessible states in the country. And in 2019, NARAL, along with partners, Planned Parenthood and other folks, took out language that would be harmful to abortion access even more. So in Nevada, we're in a good spot, but oftentimes just having things in law and policy don't actually translate to access, right? So the state as a whole has 5 abortion providers, I want to say, 2 in Reno, 3 or 4 in Las Vegas, and none everywhere else, right? So as you think about, sure, the majority of the populations are in these 2 counties, Washoe and Clark, but that also leaves out so many of our Nevadans across the country, especially our indigenous folks, right? So that doesn't translate to access for people. In Reno, our local Planned Parenthood Health Center that's on 5th Street just started abortion access and performing abortions again. So that is an accessible place, but often, again, things are not accessible for folks who are low income. So one of the things that Nevada and Reno is missing is an abortion fund. And this is something that is almost in every other state that is affiliated with the National Network of Abortion Funds that give funds specifically for folks who can't afford an abortion, can't afford to travel. In lots of states, so in Texas, that has one of the strictest laws. Folks have to travel to New Mexico or Colorado, and so they pay for travel and lodging. So we don't have that in this state to support folks. So that's somewhere that we can get involved, again, as we think about community care. One of the things that would impact across the country is we're waiting on a Supreme Court case that could come as soon as tomorrow or Monday, called June Medical versus Russo. And if this is an abortion ban in Louisiana that only has 3 abortion providers in the whole state. If the Supreme Court that has 2 new justices since the last time we saw a Supreme Court case on abortion in 2017, please fact check me. But we have Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, boo. So as we're waiting for the Supreme Court case, what would happen is if it's upheld, then Louisiana would lose all but 1 abortion provider in the state, and it would open up other states to be able to roll back their abortion access. So we're looking at states like Texas, we're looking at places like other places in the Midwest, like Missouri, and there's another aspect of this that we've already seen this, like I mentioned, 3 years ago. So what they're trying to do is a strategy of picking and continuously trying to get Supreme Court cases. So one of them would at least roll back access so that there's precedents to be able to overturn Roe v. Wade, which then leaves so much of our folks in very vulnerable positions, right? And then they have to travel, miss work, or get into dangerous situations. And things like that are popping up across, not just federally, but across the country. Colorado is having a 22-week abortion ban in their upcoming election. There are other states that are looking at this similarly. So abortion access and overall access to reproductive health care is really in jeopardy across the country.
Thank you so much, Jackie. So we're going to move on now to Kristen. Here is Kristen.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Harrison, she, her, hers. I'm currently a field organizer with Next Gen Nevada, and I'm currently doing digital electoral work for them. So just to go into some of the experience that I've had in my journey of organizing and mobilizing people, has kind of started at UNR. Definitely have been radicalized by one of Jody's talks in the center, like many of us. And also, my journey kind of started at UNR, one, in a way where you kind of just see the blatant racism up in Reno, and it makes you kind of, and one, it makes you angry, but then what it makes you do something about it, because if you have all this anger, if you have all this energy built up, and like if you're not putting it somewhere else, it just gets frustrating. So I definitely started to participate in any kind of direct actions that I could with different works around campus. And then more of my organizing experience came from doing electoral work within Nevada, and then I also went to Wisconsin on a campaign, and now I'm working another campaign here in Reno. So the electoral experience. Oh, can you all hear me now? Okay, perfect, awesome. So I would say that I am both grateful and both kind of appalled at the electoral experience that I've had. One, because I can see how the system works to backtrack a lot of the progress that we've had under the guise that we're working for progress. And I've also seen how like the electoral system is supposed to really empower people who are more marginalized, but in turn, it's kind of suppressing our voices more. So I've looked at that as the unfortunate part of the experience, but the positive part of the experience is meeting people who want to change that whole entire aspect in the electoral system that we have, that want to actually represent marginalized people, that want to represent women, women of color, that want to represent queer people, that want to represent trans people, and not just do it for the look of it. So that has been kind of like the more positive being so involved in electoral politics, is that you do see, meet, and become influenced and radicalize those people who have kind of those big ideas when they're running for something. Sorry, I'm looking at my kind of notes. So yeah, I think also a lot of my experience in organizing and mobilizing has really just been one of constantly learning, and I'm constantly, I guess, shaping and changing my personal politics and how I treat people in my community, how I'm regarding people in my community, because ultimately, like, that's more important than an election. I wouldn't say it's like more important election, but I hope you guys get where I'm going with that. I think that does more gives more progress to the idea of justice and liberation and freedom in our communities than that. And yeah, I also think that respectability politics has been something that has come up a lot for me. I would say kind of like in this part of the movement that we're seeing, because so many of us like adhere to it, especially me sometimes. So that's definitely been something that's a learning experience, and that I am challenging not only myself to learn through and work through the ways that I might perpetuate respectability politics, or that others do, or even the way that we see some, policies working that way. So yeah, challenging respectability politics has been something that I see as vital and for me to pay attention to while we're doing this work. And also, I want to touch on like the ways that people can support this work or can directly participate. I think a lot of people kind of get down on themselves because they think they're not doing enough, or they don't think that they can do enough, or they don't think that the things they do makes them a real organizer. I don't even think that should be a word, like a real organizer. I feel like if you just are passionate about, you are passionate about community, you're passionate about your community, you're passionate about marginalized people around you, the different identities around you, I think that's right there. You already started a mile long, and a lot of people. I think just keeping that intention that you're moving and fighting towards justice for not only yourself but for everyone around you. Yeah, I think that that is kind of the best way to think about it, and then using whatever you're already kind of doing that's your talent or your hobby, and seeing how you can work that into your community. Like, I cannot create a graphic for anything, but I have a lot of friends who know how to, and they're amazing at that, and I'm like in awe every time they do. So that's a very small example, but that's definitely like something that I hate hearing people say is that they don't feel like a real organizer, because I've been there. Like, don't be disheartened because you can't do 5 million things at once. Nobody can. Also, like, you shouldn't want to be super hyper productive all the time, because we're trying to get rid of the 40-hour work week, first of all. Yeah, like, don't try to feed in that you have to be hyper productive all the time, which also leads me into the point that everyone has talked about so far, which is self-care and caring for each other. I love that both Jackie and Jody brought it up. Jackie bringing up community care is so important. I think it's so important to bring up the fact that people our age, that's when mental health issues or mental illness can manifest itself. That's a very real thing that young people have to deal with and have to deal with. So I think, like, not getting, it's so easier said than done, but not getting down on yourself just because you're not present in the work all the time. Taking care of yourself, reaching out to your networks, reaching out to the networks that are around you, also reaching out to each other and providing that safety net for each other and building that trust with each other, so we can come to each other if we can't talk to our families or anything like that. Also wanted to, I know there was another question, how UNR can be safer. Is it safer for people of color and marginalized people on campus? That's a hard question. That's a hard question. I think that, one, there has to be, like, I would say, I know for, like, the poli-sci department, there's not a lot of people that share the same ideas as, like, Jody, or as people on this chat, like, who, I don't know, who believe in, like, liberation and freedom and stuff. That has been my experience with that, and they haven't really been some of the heads of the department haven't been super encouraging, especially, I feel, towards minority students. So I think one thing that has to happen is there has to be faculty that recognize that there are all types of students, recognize that there are all types of students, especially from different economic backgrounds, and some students are from non-traditional backgrounds. Some students are queer, and some students are trans, and getting used to that almost, again, which is easier said than done. And they just have to have a faculty that fosters that type of environment where people feel safe to come in and learn. Like, it doesn't have to be built, like, more sensitivity doesn't have to be built in. You kind of just have to, like, see us as humans. And again, I don't know how easy that is going to be for some faculty at UNR, or even some of the administration at UNR who I mean, they let a Nazi graduate. So I just complain. I don't think that there's any solutions really to UNR. I think that just building out our community, building out our community on campus and caring for each other is going to be the way. I don't think that we can depend on an entity that doesn't want to protect us in the first place. Yeah, I don't think that we can depend on them, so I think it's best to look inward. But yeah, I think any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. So we had a question, just like, can liberation really come through elections? But I feel like you kind of touched on that. So maybe towards the end we can like come back to that if there's some time. But thank you so much. That was really good. Thank you. So we're gonna move on now to our next panelist, who is Jamal. Here is Jamal.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jamila Barghouti, and I'm a first-generation Palestinian American. I grew up in Reno, and when I started to think about the questions that I was asked about, you know, our experience in organizing and activism, I was trying to think of the first time I was involved in, like, you know, understanding liberation or understanding activism in general, or what it means to be oppressed. And as a Palestinian, my entire life has been centered around oppression and understanding the experience, because I was raised in a country that didn't talk about what was going on at all. I was born in a time of extreme violence and upheaval in the West Bank, which involved members of my family. And so therefore, I had to know about what was going on. And that helped me to kind of understand in a more systemic way, I suppose, or understand the system more as I got older and I started to learn about other marginalized people and their experiences. And I think, you know, my experience has been that it is a constant process and something that doesn't happen overnight. I'm a little bit still uncomfortable calling myself an activist and organizer. I think I'm a very opinionated person who likes to tell people what to do. And I think that, you know, if we empower more people to feel comfortable expressing themselves, then that, you know, to Kristen's point, then you're doing the work. When you're able to stand comfortably and say that you are yourself and that you encourage others to feel the same way about themselves. And that's a very vague sense, but I think that more directly, you know, the way that we continue momentum around everything that's happening now and in our communities and having these conversations is understanding that solidarity has to extend beyond this single instance, and it has to extend beyond this one interaction with the racist system and the racist structure. I think that, you know, building solidarity between barriers that people experience, or by naming the barriers that people experience and working to dismantle them, that, you know, makes intersectionality so much more important, and understanding how people who are marginalized across different experiences, like for myself, I'm, you know, I have a lot of different social groups that pertain to different parts of my experience and of my identity. And I still, you know, have to work to be myself across all of those experiences. But in that, it has, you know, shown me that that's how intersectionality works, like understanding how these overlapping and overarching systems can affect one person's identity, or one person's life, really. And so, sorry, I got off track. I wanted to talk about the things that people can do directly. I think that there's a lot of different ways that people can be involved, because all of us have different skill sets. And so we bring not only different perspectives, but different resources to any conversation or any movement. And so I encourage people to look at the work that's already happening. I think it's extremely important to understand that there's a lineage to this work. And all of the conversations we're having now are conversations that have been happening in revolutionary circles for decades, largely in Black circles. And there's a lot of Black women who have been writing about the justice system for a very long time. And it's important to understand how you can engage in their work rather than trying to, do something on your own or recreate some perspective when this work is already being done. I think that that's really important to understand in the context of queer history and the queer experience specifically, because our liberation movement in this country is really connected to the experience of Black trans women. And it was the information that, or the resources and the know-how essentially that trans women of color brought from labor movements started by people of color into the queer community that gave the community their teeth. And I think that that's really powerful when we look at what's happening now. There's a tendency for people who have more privilege to believe that there's just so much going on, or that it's too complicated or it's too complex, but it really isn't. When we start to look at the tools that are used to oppress people and the ways that people are oppressed are very similar because they're connected to the same structures. So the way that people are kept out of institutions like higher education because of access to resources like capital, like money, or to scholarships, et cetera, like all of those things are not unique to one marginalized person. Like it's connected to a larger system. And so I think the more that we do the work internally to understand where our own values are built, or where they stand, and understanding in our own lives how we deconstruct our internal racism, our internalized homophobia, all of these things that we have been spoon-fed and steeped in our entire lives. I think that the natural inclination then is to grow from there. And once you see what's going on, it's very hard to not see it anymore. You only start to see more and more of it in different aspects of it. And I think that we also have to be very aware, in line with what all of the other presenters have said about self-care. And that has a lot to do with capacity and being honest about your capacity to engage in these things for your mental health, for your safety in certain situations, for, to be able to still have a job, to put food on the table. All of these things are very critical to being able to be alive. And so, it's not everybody can go and tell their racist boss to fuck off. That's just not realistic, pardon my language. And so we have to understand that everyone has a different capacity for those things. And, you should always feel, or you should always want to push yourself out of your comfort zone, but that should never put you into a place that is going to threaten your life, because ultimately we need you to be alive to be free. And so I think we all have to care for ourselves and our communities. And it's important for, particularly people who are marginalized, to build communities together and to understand how they can work together to build the resource network that we need. Because there's limited access to mental health resources for marginalized people, and there's limited job resources, limited housing opportunities, all of these things. So if we're able to build a network then that you can turn to for those resources, or who can tell you when there's a job, or who can tell you when somebody needs a roommate and those kind of things, then that's where the community care that Jackie was speaking about really comes into play. And then the more we start to develop those avenues to pool our resources, we start to see our power, and we start to be able to understand how we can destabilize and deconstruct all of these things that continue to perpetuate violence on our communities. I think that it's extremely important. Once again, I just want to reiterate, to understand that these movements are happening. These movements have been happening for a long time. And so if this is your first experience, or the first call that has really beckoned you to come and make you want to learn more and has sparked something, then you need to spend some time and learn the landscape. You need to understand what is going on and how things have happened previously, how we got to this place in the first place, and understand the voices that have been consistently pushing for this action and for this change.
Thank you so much, Jamal. We have a question. In the last few weeks, we've seen so many companies and brands and people miss the mark on standing strong against racism and oppression. What are the tips that you have for pushing this work for the places that we work or holding businesses big and small accountable?
Yeah, so I, because of the person that I am, the interest that I have in social justice and the passion around it, I was fortunate enough to work in social equity in the cannabis industry over the last several months. And so that is a part of the industry that is both government programs that are actively incentivizing license programs for communities that were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, as well as corporate programs to help those programs kind of proliferate. And there's also licensing incentive tied into a lot of those programs. And so many private companies, they get their licensing for certain locations through their partnerships with people who are opening their own businesses. And I think that, right, in my perspective, like, cannabis is a very different industry than a lot of other established industries, even though that it's still majority white, which is extremely unfortunate, and it's still male dominated as well. But there's a disconnect from what we typically consider to be quote unquote professional. And I think that that's actually a really good thing for the industry, because it allows many more voices to be heard and kind of just cutting through business as usual. But I think that it also opens up to these ultimately uncomfortable conversations. And I am fortunate to be in my position, and I really enjoy my job. And at the same time, I fully believe that capitalism is a huge oppressive force. And I think that it's important to understand that all of these statements that are being made by brands and companies are often not based in the ideas or values of community safety, or of making sure that their teams are, are feeling comfortable, or that their workplace is even accessible to marginalized people. It typically comes from a need to the social pressure, the things that people, the community is able to do to the business in terms of boycotting or organizing in order to hold them accountable, or to out them, and to find or to just to take them to the rails, basically. And that is tied to capital, and that is the issue with a lot of it becomes very performative, especially because they are not going to be funding all of the smaller, smaller injustices. If it's not trending, they don't have a need to message about it. And so I think that that's really important to understand, because it also shows the power that consumers hold within the capitalist structure. And that is really important, because many of us, or all of us, have to engage in the system whether we want to or not. And so understanding how we engage is beneficial. And I think that that's important in holding those companies accountable as well. When people are saying that they're going to do these things, it needs to, the pressure has to continue to say, okay, you said that you were going to, audit your employee demographics, or your, the makeup of your company. Where's that information? Is there going to be a public report? And also understanding what businesses are capable of. I think that making statements is a very simple thing to do, but because of the structure, when, how would you force a small business to do implicit bias training? And then on top of, there's like a whole industry built on implicit bias training, and people are charging thousands of dollars for these things. So we have to understand how it all comes together. And I think that that connects directly to speaking your truth and to being able to have these conversations with your family and with your friends and with your community, because that's where the work happens and that's where it's not monetized yet. And that's where I think people can do a lot of good by exploring these ideas and by holding business, the people who make the business, the owners of the business, the employees of the business, accountable for the things that they're saying.
Thank you so much, Jamal. We're going to move on to Ryan. Here is Ryan.
Hey folks, okay, yeah, as Anna said, my name is Ryan. I have been a Reno native for about 5 years. I go to high school here at the Davidson Academy, and I am the Sustainability and Outreach Manager for Nevada Youth Climate Strike, which is, it's a youth-run organization that started a few months ago, well, actually almost a year ago now. One of my friends reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in taking part of a larger climate group, because we had both voiced our passions for the climate and, you know, it sounds cliche, but securing that brighter future and all that by really going hardcore into climate activism. And I was like, of course. So we formed a branch of Nevada Youth Climate Strike, which is a subset of US Youth Climate Strike, which is a larger national organization, but we formed our own branch here in Nevada with the goal of getting a successful climate strike up and running by September 22nd was when all of those climate strikes around the world hit and everybody participated in that. And yeah, I'm sure that you have heard about those. So we got our organization up and running in a few months and organized and successfully pulled off, in my opinion, the Reno Tahoe area's first official climate strike. Over 700 people attended. It was crazy cool. Super grateful for that opportunity. But just the lessons that we could take about, you know, climate action and about our community from that, I find are very valuable. And because this is more community organizing focus, I'd like to delve a bit deeper into what I learned about, you know, mobilizing a community from my experience as a part of the climate strike. I think at the beginning, nobody on climate strike really expected the scale of the actual strike. We didn't have our goals nailed down, which isn't really great for any sort of organization. And we figured this out pretty quick when we were trying to get organized within the organization. And we had some lovely people from organizations all around the Reno Tahoe area give us guidance. Environmental activists from Moms Clean Air Force is one of them that helped us out a lot. So we learned pretty quickly that organization is key to mobilization and that we needed to use our resource and really set strict goals. So what we ended up doing then is we set the goal of having our strike set up, and we hit all of our benchmarks of getting permission to use the Believe sign area and getting all those sorts of permits were actually really interesting to go into, and that's something we're going to work on more in the future. But we were supposed to march from the Reno sign to the Believe sign, but that actually didn't end up getting passed in time. So then we had to use a bit of problem solving and figure out, you know, what are we going to do next to get the climate strike up and going to keep this motivation going. So we decided that instead of pushing all of our energy into the magnitude of the actual strike, we were going to try to get more of the community involved in the weeks leading up to the strike. So what we did is we hosted smaller events with the collaboration of Patagonia offered their space up to us, and we are infinitely grateful for that. So we hosted a sign making event. We hosted a sign making event at my school. We hosted a sign making event at Patagonia to try to rope the community in a little bit more and encourage participation in the climate. And I think the Reno community really saved our lives there in getting that participation, because obviously they were the ones that came to the strike and the strength of that community was incredibly astounding. You know, as I was standing at the front of this crowd of people with signs, it was a very powerful moment, and it was very inspiring to see that a group of people could come together focused on that common goal. And I think the important thing to take away from that community organizing is that it is impossible to do anything alone. And I know that this is an idea that a lot of my fellow panelists have brought up, is that strength in numbers is what's important. But I think, especially in the youth activist community, a lot of people struggle from sort of an imposter syndrome type complex where, you know, they say, I'm not activist enough, I'm not doing enough. And as one person, you can only do so much. Once again, I know this is sort of a repetitive idea, but you can only do so much. But being able to mobilize your community pushes that power into so many other people, and that increases your magnitude overall. So it doesn't matter how much you as a person does, it is the collaboration between a group of people that is really going to impact the community. And so that was a super cool thing to realize. And I think that has really impacted my perception of how to be an activist, and specifically a youth activist in these times, which is interesting. And moving on from that, we are working on more community-based projects because we realized how important the community was. And our main project, since the Earth Day climate strike was canceled due to COVID reasons, is SOFI, which is the Sustainability Outreach Fashion Initiative, which is a very fun acronym with a lot of long words in it. And basically what that project is we are reaching out to local businesses, specifically in the fashion industry, and talking with them about how to call for more corporate responsibility, put an end to fast fashion, which is incredibly harmful to the environment, and really just roping it back to that community and bringing it back to that space and helping our businesses in Reno thrive. So I will cut myself off there. If there are any questions, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. One of the questions that we got, a couple of people asked, what is like one thing that you'd like older activists and supporters to do? Like, how can people support the youth-led movement?
Okay, that is a really good question. I think something that I've noticed among a lot of older activists is that they're dismissive of social media, which is kind of a bit of a generalization sometimes, but a lot of older activists still subscribe to those outdated ideas of, you know, your phone is bad, the internet doesn't bring anything but harmful ideas, which, I mean, we see now more than ever is just flagrantly untrue. And I think that if you're going to support youth activism and the future of activism, you need to fully embrace the internet as a source and as a channel for that, because that is honestly the most accessible way that we can get everybody mobilized, is over this space of the internet. And so if, as an activist, if you're still dismissive of the power of the internet and social media, then I think it shows that you are blind to this opportunity we have to really create a community of activists and grow closer together. I feel like Anna may have disappeared.
All right, I think Anna's having some internet difficulties, but we will move on to our next speaker, who is Lydia Huerta. Lydia.
How are you? I first of all want to make sure that I acknowledge the fact that I do work at UNR. I'm a faculty member there, and I'm actually the result of the work of a lot of people to try to diversify the campus so that students can see people like them on campus. I am Latina. I grew up in Mexico, moved to the United States when I was 15. And I am part of the Gender, Race, and Identity program. I'm also half appointed with communication studies. And I am part of a cohort of people of color that were hired with the intent to diversify the campus and make sure that students see themselves reflected in the people that they learn with. With that being said, yes, UNR has a lot of problems, and that is part of social movement building. Change does not happen overnight. I mean, my hire was a result of like 7 years of really hard work by people at UNR. However, what I always tell my students is students have power, a lot of power, because y'all pay tuition. Right now, faculty are being required to go back to campus in the fall, regardless of the fact that COVID is a thing, because students want to be on campus and the university needs tuition dollars. So that being said, if you have so much power, then I encourage you to use it. Make demands. If you want to see different curriculum, make those demands. If you want to see different kinds of faculty, make those demands. If you want to see a program like the one that was named earlier, make demands. If you want to see those diversity, that kind of like change, you have to make the demands. You all have the power as students. You really do. I used to believe that once I was faculty, I was able to transform the university and all that kind of stuff. And I learned the hard way that while I am slowly transforming the things that I can control, I need to survive in the very institution I'm trying to transform, right? And so their power really lies with the students. With that being said, yes, I've been a long life activist since I was a kid. I grew up in theology liberation. And with that said, I could give you a whole list of things that I've done, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use this time to talk about a man whose name is Carlos Ingram Lopez. If you haven't heard this name, it's because today the New York Times released an article talking about him because the Tucson Police Department made public this video of this man who was assassinated by the Tucson Police Department. He was held, handcuffed. He asked for water and asked for his grandmother. And he, like George Floyd, like Eric Garner, said he couldn't breathe. And after 12 minutes, he died of cardiac arrest. And I say this because this is part of what Jamal was talking about, the intersectionality of movements and the intersectionality of building coalitions that affect us all of us. I haven't seen any calls to show up and say his name. His name, again, was Carlos Ingram Lopez, right? I haven't seen any Facebook groups, any Twitter feeds about this. We have had the worst humanitarian crisis in the United States for the last 3 years. There have been children in cages. And while there was little protests here and there, those things died off. And all of this is a result of a very colonial way of thinking that we have in this country. And we haven't addressed that. And we need to start taking a stand towards that. I mean, much like the Black Lives Matter movement, which seeks to do abolitionist activism, we need to build coalitions around different identity groups so we can dismantle the systems, because it's not going to help just to scream his name and say Eric Garner and George Floyd. We also need to look at all those other people that have died at the hands of prison guards that are not part of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? That don't represent the Black community, but are also part of the people of color who have died. Our Native American sisters and brothers also form part of this, right? So what would happen if all these different groups got together and all of them demanded justice and all of them demanded a dismantling of these systems, right? It would be a more horizontal movement. There would be a coalition of people who want to do this. If we think back to sort of like other times when social movements were successful, it was because there was coalitions. And so if anything, I want to encourage anyone out there to make a call for action. Bring visibility to other people who are also suffering, who are experiencing the same kind of violence, the same kind of outrage, right? Latinos, just like our Black sisters and brothers, have experienced a process of dehumanization that dates back to about 1848. And we don't talk about this, right? Granted, our Black sisters and brothers have had a longer period of dehumanization, but we need to address is that this is the moment to dismantle those systems that have continued to dehumanize us. And we need to really think about this in a horizontal way so that we can, as a wave, really come and challenge the system, because it's not working right now. And unfortunately, we're kind of separating and, well, that's not my issue, that's not your issue, right? I saw a lot of Latinos being like, well, you know, Afro-Latinos matter. Well, yeah, Afro-Latinos matter because they're part of the people of color that are being affected. Just like our Black sisters and brothers, just like our Native American sisters and brothers, right? We need to think about these things in an intersectional way, just like Jamal was saying. So with that being said, I really want to encourage you all to seek out resources, educate yourselves, listen. There's a lot of stuff on the internet. The Ruckus Foundation has some really great resources. The Red Nation blog on decolonization, revolutionary socialism has awesome stuff on there as well. Transforming Harm is another great website with awesome resources. If you've never done any activism at all, I really recommend you just go and check out the Ruckus Foundation. It has a really simple organizing 101 thing. And also, when you call people to spaces, think about the fact that many people might show up. This is a moment where a lot of people are showing up to things. Don't put people's lives at risk. Think about how can we be entrapped in this space? What are the things that can happen that could go really bad, right? So these are some just, I am just a person that cares very much about my own community, and I'm also in solidarity with other movements. And I really want us to encourage us, all of us, working together across different platforms. Climate change is an immigrant issue, right? Our sisters and brothers in Palestine, that is part of the same system that we're seeing right now, right? The Israeli state is part of the United States in the prison industrial complex. Like, we're seeing these things that are reproduced over and over and over again in different kinds of movements, and we cannot afford to be silent right now. We really cannot afford to lose momentum. So how can we build coalitions among all these movements so we can stand stronger together, right? What is the march that is happening this weekend? We need to keep that momentum. Who's showing up on the street? Who's writing those petitions? I mean, our own city council members have no idea about what's happening, right? I mean, where are the people that are like bomb-needing their houses? We need to start calling attention and taking direct action, because if we don't, everything goes back to normal and nothing changes.
Thank you so much, Lydia. We got a question saying that we learned that Par Boulevard still, the Par jail still has ICE officers and cooperates to some extent with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Do you have any thoughts on how we can change this, and if we can?
Well, considering Reno spends about $79 million on police and prisons, write your council members, ask them to reallocate those resources. I mean, why are we keeping people in prison that don't need to be in prison, right? Like, write letters to your council members, show up at their houses, show up at the city council meetings, demand. If the people don't ask of their quote unquote representatives, then what are they representing?
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure we put some information to contact our city council members in a document that'll be published later. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, Aria. Here is Aria. Thank you.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am just like so incredibly honored to be included with all of the people who have spoken so far. Just absolutely incredible human beings. And so can't even begin to express like how honored I am and how I feel completely inadequate to be able to follow all of that up. But a little introduction to myself. My name is Aria Overly, and I'm one of the community organizers over at Action, which is an organization that works to organize communities of faith here in Northern Nevada. So we have, over the last couple of years, worked on a lot of affordable housing issues, which is probably how a lot of you have heard of us. Engagement issues, and so I'm really excited to talk to you about what organizing looks like and to sort of uplift some of the things that I heard from some of the other wonderful organizers in this town. And so I think, like many of you, what has really been at the forefront of my mind and really making me think about how I am organizing moving into this year is the idea of police brutality and anti-Blackness that happens in our communities, and what role we have as people, myself as a white person particularly, also our communities of faith have, and what role they have to play in this situation. So I have been reflecting a lot on my own encounters with police and what brought me to the organizing world and to wanting to be engaged in justice work. And for me, it's been a passion for disability and mental health, and the ways that I've seen disability and mental health affect people in our communities, people in my family, and the interactions that the people who I love who are disabled or mentally ill had in their interactions with police officers as I was growing up. And so some really distinct memories I have were when I was a child, and my brother, who has Down syndrome, and he's also half Afghani, so he's not white, unlike me, was walking home from school, and a police officer picked him up and put him in handcuffs and took him to the jail because he said that it wasn't safe for a disabled boy to be walking home alone. When it was clear that the only lack of safety was facing that police officer. Or when my mother, who really struggled with mental health our entire childhood, attempted suicide, I called the police. And the police came and told me and my sister that it was our fault because we hadn't cleaned their room. And that these interactions with police are so common for people who suffer from mental illness and disability. And that when you add the deep anti-Blackness that exists within our society and our culture, that leads to so much brutality and death, and that it's like high time that we as a community begin to address and deal with these issues more deeply in a way that we never have in this community. And I think a few years ago, we had worked to implement an affordable housing trust fund to try to put funding towards affordable housing. And we were successful getting that implemented, but the Washoe County Commissioners refused to pass the funding source to actually fund that affordable housing trust fund. So at the moment, it's unfunded. None of that funding is actually going towards building or maintaining low-income housing. And that we have a police department that is so bloated in its funding, but we can't get affordable housing to the people in this community who need it. And the anger that like gives me when I go to watch our unsheltered and our houseless neighbors face eviction and harassment from police officers who are getting huge paychecks. When I see people in the community that I work with facing eviction, and police will come and ensure that eviction, oftentimes without any sort of court date or just cause. But when a landlord breaks the law, it's not police officers that they deal with. It's code enforcement. It's they have all these court dates they go through before anything ever happens to them, and we're lucky if anyone can ever get through that process. So I think what has been at the forefront of my mind for the past couple of weeks is what we can be doing as a community and what particularly we can be doing as faith communities. And I was particularly struck by a couple of things the other said. What Jackie said about the roles that white people have to play in terms of working with people and helping them grow, and understanding that true liberation means that we don't push people out, that we work with them. Obviously to an extent, I'm not going to ask any person of color or a person who recognizes themselves in danger, but that what we're doing when we do have the privilege to do so, to bring people into these spaces in meaningful ways. And then what Lydia said about the need to build coalitions with each other. And so I think part of what I do in organizing faith communities, I'm frequently working with people who are on very different parts of the ideological spectrum than I am, but whom in my conversations and my relationship with them, I genuinely believe share the same base values. and that so often they've grown up, they're older, they are still existing within ideas or understandings of the world that are 20, 30 years old. So what are we doing as community organizers to build bridges between people, to create a place of belonging rather than exclusion in the spaces that we work in? And so I think that's, for me, what I'm really passionate about in this moment. I'm also really passionate about recognizing that white supremacy is a system created and maintained by white people, and it's a white person's responsibility to tear those systems down and to allow people of color to enter into these spaces in meaningful ways. And so one of the things that I'm really trying to encourage my leaders in this moment is that not to retreat, like what I think is a common tendency to retreat in these book clubs or these discussion groups to talk about their whiteness and to talk about how harmful their whiteness is or what the issues are around racial justice, to read white fragility. I'm not opposed to any of these things, but I think it's often an application of our duty in this moment to create real change. And so I encourage people to learn, but learning and acting have to be done together with the acknowledgement that none of us are perfect. We're all going to mess up. It's about accountability to ourselves and to other people. It's about continued growth and learning in this process, and about not shrinking away from this moment because you may feel inadequate to be there. And so that's, I think, what's really guiding my moment right now. And then I read a quote yesterday by Ishiomo, which I really appreciated, when she gave the metaphor about if your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't start a discussion club to talk about the history of fire and why fire is bad. You put the fire out. And so that's kind of what I really want to encourage people to do in this moment and kind of where I'm at. But yeah, so in terms of action, what you can do to get involved and engaged is right now we are working on setting a Call to Lead series to start building on our racial justice work. And I should have had the link up for that, I apologize. But I'll shoot the link over to the admin right now for how to sign up for that. We also have a relief fund for our immigrant neighbors who have been excluded from COVID-19 relief. So if you're an immigrant and need relief or funding right now in order to help you get through COVID-19, I encourage you to reach out to me and I can get you directed to those funding. If you want to donate or support that fund, please also reach out to me and we can figure out how to get that started. And then we also have a pledge card for folks that you can sign to get engaged. But I feel like I have gone over my 5 minutes, so I will end it there and hopefully there's some questions.
Thank you, Aria. We had one question. What are police alternatives or 911 alternatives to call when we actually need help?
That's a really wonderful question, and I wish I had a better answer to offer. If other people do, I would really appreciate it. I don't have a lot of great opportunities right now. I think it depends specifically on what the issue is, and if there's any resources listed out there, I would love to get that.
All right, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next speaker, who is Helen Fillmore, or excuse me, Monique Normand.
Trying to unmute. Okay, sorry. I was trying to look up because there actually is a service if there is not for the police if you are an emergency, if there's a mental health issue or something like that. But of course, I didn't save the number, but I will look for that and I will share that with Holland and hopefully they will be able to get that out. But that is something that exists. But anyway, my name is Monique, and I'm no longer a paid, I guess, community organizer, but I guess activist. I'm actually a clinical social work intern right now. I'm a licensed social worker, and so I actually work more so in the mental health field now. But I'm still out there doing stuff always in the community. Let's see, my headspace went away for a minute. I guess really quickly, I guess my first kind of introduction to any kind of organizing would be in Vegas with the Culinary Union. All of my family pretty much has been in the Culinary Union at some point in time, and so I remember like at 6 years old going and walking picket lines, you know, with my mom and my dad, and being like the water girl and giving water out to union members. And of course, since then, I've moved to Reno. I worked with PLAN, the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, for about 2.5 years, and I did work around voters' rights and a bunch of other things. And so that kind of brings me to now. I kind of made a list on, because I got sent like the questions from Holland, and the questions on the list that I thought were great was first the mental health one, which I love that a bunch of people brought up, because for some reason I just thought no one would. And then the other one was, you know, how do folks get involved if they are unable to get out of the house, if they're immune compromised, or if they are, you know, for whatever reason, just can't participate. So I wrote a couple of notes of that, and then I'm just going to share that real quick. So first of all, just like Arya said, just like Lydia said, attending town halls, attending city council meetings, and those are actually in Nevada right now, specifically in Reno. Those have been all online, and so you could attend those online and not have to step a foot outside of your home, and they're allowing people to provide public comment during those as well. And if you're not allowed to attend them online in real time, you can send comments ahead of time. So that is always, you know, something that can be done now, especially right now. You know, there's all kinds of things that you can ask of your police department or of the city council. Calling your officials, you know, straightforward, just how other folks have already said. Right now we had a campaign to call the DA's office about Micaiah Lee, a young Black man who was shot in January, and there's kind of no info right now on where that case is, or, you know, his mother's been asking for video footage, and that hasn't been given. So that's, you know, a demand that's being asked right now. The other thing I would say is, if you can't go to rallies, if you feel like you can't, you know, attend a protest or something like that, being supportive of those rallies and those protests. So like donating supplies, markers, boards to write on, maybe pre-made signs, donating water, pre-perishable snacks, bandages, all that kind of stuff is great. The other thing I would say is educating yourself, which a bunch of people have already said, and not just, you know, like asking your friends of color about things, but actually like, you know, looking for real news and doing some of that work. And then the last thing I would say, and specifically for white folks, you know, calling out racism when you see it, right? So like, oftentimes, you know, I feel like, you know, especially in workplaces or in orgs or things like that, you know, someone will say something and everyone's kind of like, you know, at the table like, oh, should I say something? You know, and then oftentimes it leaves that person of color who's at the table, which usually there's just one or two, right? Who like then like feels like they have to say something, and then they're like that person. And so if more people started just calling that out, that would leave it off the shoulders of folks of color always having to do that work. So I would just say that's just really important, you know, just call that shit out. And then on the other scope of that, of mental health, and I was thinking about this question a lot, because you know, that's what I do all day is meet with people. I work as a therapist now. And so one of the things that I think right now we really have to be mindful about is the media that we consume, and that's social media and television, and articles, just all of it. And so I was thinking of like you know what things are important as we're like choosing the media that we consume, and also like when we consume it, and all of that stuff. And I think for me personally, especially when the COVID thing happened, right, like I was working from home, and then oftentimes in between I'm like watching the TV and trying to see like what's happening, what's going on in the world, and even now, and a lot of that stuff, it's just and I can say for myself as a Black woman, it's like almost re-traumatizing, is like watching these videos and watching like all these things happening. And that doesn't mean that we shield ourselves from the news. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying being mindful. So first of all, being intentional about the time. So like setting like boundaries with your time with media, saying like, oh, I'm only gonna watch or consume media for an hour a day or something like that, and being really intentional about it. I would say for your mental health, not looking at your phone or watching the news right before bed or first thing when you wake up. um, no one needs to consume that right before falling asleep. That's not going to give you any great dreams. And then first thing when you wake up, again, do something like meditation or watch something happy or go for a walk, and then have your coffee and watch the news. I think those things are healthy. The other thing I would say is turning off notifications. I know that sounds like, some people don't feel great about that, but you don't need a notification, for Facebook every 5 minutes going off to tell you about an article that you probably don't really need to be reading at that point in time. Um, and the last thing I would say is taking time for yourself, like everyone else has said. One of the things I always tell people is think of yourself as a cup. And so you're constantly just going around, right, giving people energy, just like literally to your family, to your friends, to work, to all these things in your life, and like, how are you getting refilled? And so I think that's really important, especially right now, whether you are someone who is bound at home and you can't really go out, or if you're someone who is out there protesting and doing the work, being mindful of how you're refilling your own cup. And so those are the things that I'll leave on. I know a lot of time has already been taken, and I just want to thank all the panelists that have already gone on. It's been great to listen to everybody, and yeah, just respect everyone a lot.
Thank you so much, Monique. We're a little bit over time already, but after Helen speaks, we're gonna stick around for just a couple minutes and get to some more questions. If anyone has to leave, that's totally fine, but we might stick around till like 8 if that's okay. But for now, here is our final speaker, Helen Fillmore. Thank you.
Mi'anga mibi'i dewat la'umet degum dia le'i Helen Fillmore debo itlu degum dia le'i. Hi everyone, my name is Helen Fillmore. I am part of the Washoe tribe. I was born and raised just south of here in Gardnerville on the Dresslerville Reservation. And I guess for a little bit of my background, I just want to say that my role in my community has continued to shift over the years. But and in the Reno community as well, even though I grew up in Gardnerville, both my parents are activists. And so I grew up spending a lot of Saturday afternoons in front of the federal building, protesting against the Iraq War, protesting against mining in indigenous lands. And I've been really grateful to kind of see how activist movements and how the community organizing has changed, and really seen the change in attitudes of this community. When I was growing up, I was really lucky to be a part of kind of a movement within our reservation and within our community that was really focused on revitalizing our traditional ways and revitalizing our indigenous language. And in so many ways, even though this was only happening while I was a child, it's really shaped my life today. And now I'm starting to push 30, but those experiences of learning from our elders really remind me constantly about how brand new colonization is in this land, how brand new colonization is to Reno. I mean, we think about 150 years and that's a really long time, but that's not, in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing. We're part of really fragile, capitalist system is a really fragile system, right? And we see that clearly because of COVID-19. We know that colonization is a really fragile system because in order to have colonization, you do have to have racial oppression. And so when we think about liberation, when we think about kind of moving these movements forward, keeping this momentum going, I think it's really important to look at the root cause of a lot of these issues and to really reflect back on the systems as a whole. Right now, we are talking about police brutality. We're talking about this movement is really driven about protecting Black lives. And I think it's important to be honest about how the systems of oppression are deeply interconnected, but also stay focused on the calls to action that truly drive change. So we focus on Black lives, even though Native lives are also impacted by police brutality and are also being taken. But we focus on Black lives because they are the most vulnerable. They are the ones that are going to be changed. And so if we change the system so that police can no longer have the ability to kill Black people, then it helps everybody else out. And so when we look at whether our focus is on climate change, our focus is on reproductive health, when our focus is on these different types of oppression that we all experience and that we're all a part of, and that in a lot of ways we all buy into, we also have to look at the communities that are going to be the most vulnerable and the communities that are most susceptible to marginalization and try to address those calls first. Somebody had stated, you know, when the house is on fire, the first thing you do is you put the fire out and then try to figure things out from there, how to prevent fires from starting in the future. I would say my role in community organizing continues to shift. I've had experience in direct action. I've had experience when I was an undergrad, I went to the University of Washington. And at that time, the students of color, we co-founded a student diversity coalition to create a diversity credit requirement. And so this was an initiative that was led by students and continues to impact 30,000 people every single year, because every undergraduate student is required to take a diversity credit requirement. In this initiative, it took us 4 years, the entire time I was in school, but it took us 4 years to get that in place. And then it continues to change from there on out. And it was a movement that wouldn't have happened if we weren't all willing to work together. And so First Nations was the Native student group, the Black Student Union, MECHA, FASA, the Filipino American Student Association, and then PSA, the Pacific Islander Student Association. So we all came together and we really fought for this change. And that was something that I think when we are willing to work together on things that are going to impact these big changes, it's a truly eye-opening experience. And so I want to say recently, I guess I want to provide just a little bit of a perspective. In 2018, I was elected onto our Washoe Tribal Council. And I want to just share this experience because whereas before I was really a central part of our community and a central part of my community in organizing more on the ground level, but more recently moved into that governmental level and really trying to evaluate our policies, our procedures, and seeing like these different inefficiencies. And I want to share this perspective because this was something, the bureaucracy of government and being a government official, really, and on a very small government, we have 1,400 tribal members, and so it's a very small population, a small government, but it's really provided a lot of perspective on regular public officials, the Reno City Council, even the state legislature and Congress, and how I guess, how to navigate those systems to create change as well. So, for example, in our government, we've been defunding the police for years just because we don't have the resources to pay our police force. And what that's led to in a lot of ways is that our community members, a lot of times when they're in need, I'll get a phone call. And it's a weird, I don't always know how to address emergency situations. And it's kind of that weird, like, okay, what are the different resources? I have to call social services. We have the housing department. We have these different resources to help people. And as a government official, you know, if I called my representative on city council when one of my community members was in an emergency, that's not going to happen in Reno, right? But I think that it's shown me that there are little ways that can change and that we can change it from the ground up. It can be changed by the people and it can be changed in our systems. And so I would say, as far as keeping the momentum going, as somebody in kind of a government level right now, my full focus, and I don't want to say unfortunately, but still my tribe's having a really tough time planning for and addressing COVID-19 in our community. We haven't had cases. We've had on the reservations, but at the same time, it's been low resources, low, a lack of resources really, to me, has demonstrated how much room there is for improvement and how much more we need to focus on local organizing, so that we have safety nets for people. And so I get a lot of phone calls about a lot of different things. And I think the more that we can call out our public officials, the more likely we are going to see change. And the more their inbox is full, the more their voicemails are full, the more the fire stays lit. And so I know that I'm really glad that people talked about mental health and really talked about, you know, how our roles do change as community organizers, where maybe there's that imposter syndrome, but at the same time, we're all one community and everybody has a different role and something else to contribute. And so, and that can change, right? So sometimes you might be somebody who's more active vocally and more in that direct action role. And then maybe you end up more in kind of a strategic role where you're more trying to address the specific policies in place rather than just mobilizing community members. And it will change over the years. And I think that the more we embrace that too, the less stressful it becomes and the less of a, I guess, like, things don't feel as unattainable. And the more that we I guess embrace each other's differences and embrace each other's skills and gifts that they have to offer to the movement is really important. And then at the heart of this, at the end of this, I am just really thankful for all of the panelists, because in more ways than not, I wanted to be here to listen, because I am still struggling with how do I be the best ally that I can be? How do I be that ally within my position, even on my tribal council? Tribes sometimes have a better, I guess, link to the federal government because we're sovereign entities than somebody at a Reno City Council level. And so how do we use this role within our tribal governments to be that ally as well, so that we can, we have more of a lot of times that phone isn't being answered on the other side, but we do have that right. And so, because I do think that our struggles the system. We are incredibly interconnected, and the only way to really drive change is to be honest about the system as a whole, and then be honest about who's being impacted disproportionately, and really trying to address those and provide those safety nets for those people. And then we can create such a more just and a different system. And the reason why I started with how new our system is that I think a lot of people are scared of change because it feels uncertain, but we need to be realistic about how people have been trying to iron out the system of oppression so that it's more digestible as society changes. But at the end of the day, this system is brand new, and we can visualize, we can articulate, we can theorize a much better system, a much more just system, and then we can also materialize that. And in a lot of ways, we're in a perfect opportunity right now because we're in a time of great crisis. In so many different levels, we are in a time of great crisis. And so this is a time where we need to start to reimagine an alternative to this oppressive system that we're in. And so with that, I just want to thank you all. I went way over time. Sorry, but if there are any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen. I'm just waiting a second to see if any come through. But thank you so much to all of our panelists and to everyone who has stuck around this whole time. We'll answer a few more questions, but again, if anyone else needs to head out, thank you. Several people did ask if, like, pretty much to all of the panelists, if there are any specific resources or speakers that have influenced them or that people should be following. And if there's anyone that wasn't mentioned, if the speakers could send those to us, we'll put them into the document that Holland will be publishing on our website, so everyone can take a look at that, look at all the resources that were mentioned here, and then anything else that the panelists want to add to that, we'll put in there. So a question that we got for Helen was, how can we support the Washoe tribe during the COVID crisis?
So right now, I do appreciate that question. That's really kind and sweet. Right now, I think we have it. I think we have the help that we need. It's more kind of a matter of, I guess it's more internal issues that are preventing us from moving forward and really getting kind of the infrastructure and the equipment that we need. But I do appreciate that question. That is really kind of you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to a few other questions that got asked for some of the other panelists and for everybody. So this one was directed for Jody, but if anyone else feels like they want to jump in, you're welcome to. If you use the raise hand button, panelists, that would be great. So the question is, as a white educator who serves a predominantly non-white Latinx population, I often wonder about how to structure roundtable discussions focused on identity in my public school classroom that is age appropriate. I teach high school and non-colonial. Do you have any discussion starters or specific techniques that you recommend based on your own experience?
Yeah, I'm in the College of Education, and so my dissertation, my scholarship research is pedagogy, right? And read my dissertation because I wish you put so much time into this thing, but no one reads it, and so I'm working on the next round. But definitely, it's education as a system that's meant to kind of beat who we are. I don't see many times that we get to talk about who we are in a classroom with other people who are different from us. And I'm thinking about what Dr. Huerta said about, working together. And I just think that's the power. And it was one of the questions. It's like, if we come into a room, we have different ways of knowing. And when we use our different ways of knowing, that's the power of diversity. So in the classroom, your students on this subject know a lot more than my students in my classroom. I'm not trying to tell you about your classroom. My students know more than me on the subject. And when I can get them to say that they know more than me on who they are, then we win. If we're creating a coalition right now, and I look at the panelists and I look at who's in the room, I have a lot to learn. I have a lot. If I have, right now it's Black Lives Matter. This is a rant, and I don't know if it goes. I've been wanting to say it. Do you ever go to a meeting and then the next meeting you say what you want to say in the last meeting? So the last meeting I wanted to say this, but it's like Black Lives Matter is about, okay, let's just say Dr. King was about jobs and freedom, right? It is about environmental and climate change. But right now, Black people are getting shot. So the climate doesn't even matter. That may be a wrong thing to say, but you see where I'm at? Like, people getting shot, and we tend to focus on the police. I wonder what would happen if we focus on the families who lost. What kind of change would we create when we actually listen to them about their loss, and the families whose family goes to jail and stay in jail for 40 years and how that affected them. So in the classroom, I bet you I did it. I mean, check this out. I did it with new students at orientation. We had a question that was step into this circle if you have a family member in jail. And the people that stepped in, they didn't know that there were other people on a college campus who had family members in jail, had a similar experience. So in your classroom, trust this. It's Chris Emden, reality pedagogy for white folks who teach in the hood and all the rest of y'all too. And he's coming up with Ratchetemics coming up. But you can watch this video too. But the people in your classroom have so much to offer. Just like I'm learning from all of us. I hope we do this in person when we can, because I'm just feeling like our energy would be incredible. Last point, then I'm gonna shut up for 5 minutes. But I feel like we leave whatever we do in our communities that sustains us. I'm talking in our communities, like in Black community, right? We tend to leave it when we come into other spaces that are not our community. We act like the community we're going into instead of where we came from. We forget those strengths. A simple thing that I think that Black people do that sustains us is eat together. I think a lot of people do that, but Black people, when we eat together, we do a lot of stuff. And we don't do that when we come into other spaces. Like, we need to do the things that got us through this to the point. So instead of trying to say diversity is acting white as a person of color, and that's diverse, we gotta be who we are in our community. And sometimes that's difficult, but I think that will help us in the classroom. Like, what are the things that these people are doing, these students? I think, yes.
Thank you so much, Jody. I have another question that it was directed for Jackie, but again, if anyone else has any input, they're welcome to contribute. What tips do you have about calling people in and out? What have you learned that can help us hold people accountable, especially when they're resisting listening to marginalized people when they get criticism?
Yeah, wow, that is a great question. I'll start with my own experience first before I touch on a tension point I actually had in this panel, which I'm taking it as a moment of opportunity for all of us to learn. I, like so many other people, right, we're socialized in a specific way that's under all these systems of power. So when I was unlearning and still continue to unlearn some of the things that I know, I was called out by folks in a different ways. And for me, I started on Tumblr. Shout out to the youth on Tumblr. And I was straight up called out. They were like, shut up, like, pardon the language, shut the fuck up, but what you're doing is harmful. And there was a point for me that I decided, again, going back to that love piece that Bell Hooks often talks about, that Audre Lorde talk about, that prominent and brilliant Black, queer, lesbian, feminists talk about, is doing things with love. And so I saw that as someone telling me that they loved me enough, or they cared, or not even me. It wasn't about me, right? So taking an anti-colonial stance of, it wasn't about me. They loved themselves enough to tell me I did something wrong that hurt them or their community. And so I take now being called out as an opportunity. That's not the same as cancel culture, right? That's not the same as ostracizing people. Also cancel culture being from AAVE, so African American Vernacular English, has been taken over by white people and co-opted and now deemed as something that's bad. So again, how whiteness translates into some of the work that we, or some of the things that we're seeing now. But I've taken being called out as doing better and being better, and then being able to be better in the community that I am on an intrapersonal manner. And so, but that doesn't translate to everyone, right? So you know your people best, and this is where, I hate the word privilege, but where I'm going to use privilege, but where folks who have privilege or have a connection with someone who's unmovable, or someone who'd be maybe more resistant to learning the things they know, is coming from someone that is similar to them, if not a loved one. So someone who is someone who they know and trust, or at least someone with a similar background, right? So it's why communities of color often say, like, white folks, you have to do this work, because if it comes from folks that they're oppressing, it's not going to go through, right? If it comes from another white man, it'll come through or resonate in a much different way than it would if I were saying it, right, as a young queer Latina. So that's like one way, is seeing where you are at, what kind of privilege you have, and where you can interject yourself. There are so many resources. I think Ryan spoke to how the internet is such an asset right now, where you don't have to be at UNR, you don't have to be in an ivory tower to actually know these things. And most organizing doesn't come from UNR. It doesn't come from an ivory tower, right? It doesn't also live in the nonprofit industrial complex. I think Jamal pointed out how they're not and also Monique pointed out that they're not a quote unquote paid organizer, but organizing doesn't exist within nonprofits. It doesn't exist within organizations. It exists within the community. And nonprofits are also agents of capitalism, and how foundations harm folks is a way that they fund nonprofits. So I would say the internet is a way that you can find tangible things and tangible solutions to meet people where they're at. And starting with yourself, starting with your own story. We often say the story of self is a way to move people, push people to take action, but really to humanize and take heart to, sorry, I'm gonna ask if you're unmuted, if you can mute for me, that'd be great. For folks that, I just lost my train of thought. Oh no, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, well, I'm sure it'll come back to me. But the point of tension for me actually in this panel was there were really good ways that folks talked about cross-movement work and solidarity work and building coalitions. And I think there was also a point for me where we talked about it in a way that was anti-Black. And I want to make sure we're being able to call in. So I'm hopefully modeling this for folks here as when we're talking about cross-issue movements, right? When we're talking about how folks are affected, often Black and brown people are the most affected, but because of how anti-Blackness is the pillar of white supremacy, we can't just dismiss it as, why are we only talking about anti-Blackness? Why are we not also talking about communities of color in general? When we have to center folks who are most impacted, right? Liberation means all of us. And if we start at the folks who are least impacted, we're leaving the rest of the folks out, right? And so there's a moment here that we were talking about someone else getting shot, and it was like, why aren't they also rallying for us? But that is not the truth. Black people have always rallied for, across the board, right? Black queer people specifically, Black queer trans women specifically, have always rallied for everybody, especially for their communities and for them. And so for us to turn around and say, why not us also, is harmful to all of us. It's harmful to our movement. It's harmful to how we progress and how we bring, how we center the most impacted in order to actually achieve liberation. So I hope that resonates with folks, that even on this panel, there was a moment here that was a tension for me, but we can still learn, and we can change our language to make sure that we're not trying to erase people while upholding while trying to uplift different communities. Where instead we can, and I think Jamal and both Helen and other folks did a really good job of being able to speak to Palestine liberation and Indigenous liberation and sovereignty in a way that wasn't oppression Olympics, because this is not about oppression Olympics, this is about liberation. I'm gonna stop it.
So this is Helen. I just wanted to also just make a quick comment to Lydia that I'm with Jody as far as I'd love to have this conversation in person one of these days, because I think the energy would just be amazing. But I think when it comes to call out and call in, I just want to make the comment of taking responsibility of your own community, of your own family is really, really important. So in our Indigenous community, there is a lot of anti-Blackness, right? And so you don't want to, I can't pretend right now and say that we don't have anti-Blackness in our Indigenous communities. And so over these last few months, these last few weeks, these last few years, trying to call in my community members who I really care about and who I really love to be realistic and to face our own bias towards others. And it's way more important for me to do that because they know me, they trust me, we love each other, than it is for a Black person to have to do that to them in the workplace, or somebody that they don't know, because to have to do that. So when we think about our racist uncle, it's way better for us I'm not going to close him off because I know that he's hurting other people, right? So I'm going to try to embrace that and have that conversation with him so that somebody else who's actually harmed by his words, by his language, doesn't have to have that conversation with him, because that's trauma on their part. Whereas I can have that conversation and really try to change that attitude, because that's my responsibility. I'm responsible to my community as well. And so I think stepping up for that, if you're in we don't always want to say privilege, but stepping up and taking responsibility for those conversations and having those conversations is really important, so that the people that are truly impacted, that are really hurt and harmed by those attitudes, don't have to have them. And so, Lydia definitely touched on that, but I do just really want to drive that home as far as, when we are moving forward and trying to keep the momentum going and be good allies to each other.
Thank you, Helen. And Jackie, I actually want to acknowledge both of you for calling me out. I don't think I explained myself in that moment of frustration, because I literally watched the video of Carlos Lopez being restrained and dying 5 minutes before we got on this. So I was processing all those emotions, and it's not an excuse, but thank you for calling me out on that. I do recognize that as someone who has binational citizenship, I have a lot of privileges. And I also, I'm aware that I have a lot of privileges that my Black brothers and sisters don't have. And I think for me, the central question around all of this is, what is the value of human life, and how much are we willing to put up with in the value of human life? And like I mentioned earlier, right, the statement Black Lives Matter is important because of the fact that it was a dehumanizing process for centuries. So in order to say Black Lives Matter, it is returning that humanity to our Black brothers and sisters. And also, at the same time, that legacy of anti-Blackness definitely carried over to other groups, right? And yes, I'm not saying that we shouldn't honor our Black brothers and sisters and the dehumanization they have had. On the contrary, I'm saying we need to honor that and also recognize how we play into that, and also ask ourselves, what is the value of human life? And can we intersectionally, as people of color, come together and stand together to demand from our governments that our lives matter, that there's value. Not that all lives matter, no. Black lives matter, and I will say that first and foremost. I just want us to be asking the question, what is the value of human life when we have children in cages, when we have Black, brown, and indigenous people in terrible living conditions, terrible education systems, where all these intersections of whiteness have come to build a system that is oppressive. So all of us who are on this panel, all of us should think about what is the value of life and how can we stand up to what we believe life is, right? Because if we are sitting by passively watching people get imprisoned, people get killed, our Black brothers and sisters, our trans sisters specifically, our Black trans sisters being dragged on the streets, if we're just sitting here passively looking at this, then what is the value of human life? And I've been struggling with this question. I feel very impotent in this moment because I feel like there's so much we could do together and we're not communicating. And to Jody's point, yes, if we were to have this in person, I think this would be a really energetic conversation. But also, what are the moments that we have in our own lives where we can ask this question of other people? What is the value of life, of human life to you? And why is some life valued more than others? Because we need to start dismantling this colonial discourse that continues to be the centerpiece of this country. It needs to stop. It needs to stop.
Alrighty, thank you guys so much for your thoughtful responses to those questions. Do we have any more quick questions before we wrap it up for this evening? Check.
Well, I feel like one thing that I wanted to add in terms of like calling people in or out is not living with the expectation of like immediate understanding, that they will immediately apologize or take responsibility for their mistakes or their actions or accountability, but that understanding that so often this understanding comes over time. I know for me, I'm really slow about thinking through things, so I oftentimes need space and time and need to hear it a few times to get things. So I encourage you to like understand that and hear that when you're speaking to people, that their immediate response may not be what you want to hear, but don't let that be a discouragement from continuing to call people in or out and to continuing to work on people and talk to people and understand that process that takes time to learn and to grow as people.
Alrighty, thank you again to all of our panelists who joined us this evening and to all of the participants who stuck through it this whole time. We want to make sure that everybody keeps these conversations going. They're very important to have. And we will be, if you check over in the chat, we just dropped the resources page on our website. So it's got all the resources that all of our panelists touched on this evening, as well as some other good ones for people and some opportunities for action as well. As well as some contact info if you want to contact or reach out to some of the panelists from this evening. All right, I think we'll end it now. Again, thank you guys so much, and let's keep this going. Have a good night, everybody.